105 FM and 1390 AM in Washington, D.C. We have with us now journalist and political analyst. It's Caleb Maupin. Caleb, welcome to Fault Lines.
Glad to be here as always.
All right. Well, you got a lot of stuff going on, so let's start with the UN General Assembly is wrapping up. What do you think of what's your take on everything? A lot of things going on there. What's your take?
Well, we heard the debut speech from Bolsonaro. We heard Trump once again speak to the UN General Assembly and give a talk that was much more focused on opposing China this year than other years that we've heard from Trump. He did seem to hit on some similar themes in his remarks. It followed many of the other speeches. But what I thought was interesting, everyone seems to have noticed that Donald Trump's UN speech this year seemed much more toned down. The energy level just wasn't there. He wasn't as excited about it. Perhaps that impeachment inquiry and the Ukraine scandal has him a little bit nervous and on edge and not as fired up as he was previously when he addressed the UN. We heard Rouhani, the Iranian president. And if you listen to the Iranian president's speech, it is a big contrast to the way he talked when he first got elected. Rouhani took office on a platform of negotiating with the United States, of not being like his predecessor Ahmadinejad, of trying to be for reconciliation and negotiation. And if you heard the speech that he gave at the UN, it was a very angry speech, basically calling out the United States, accusing the United States of supporting the Taliban and of supporting Daesh terrorism. Iran has certainly reacted very strongly to the moves of the United States when it comes to pulling out of the JCPOA deal. We heard an interesting speech by the Venezuelan vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, exposing the links of the Venezuelan opposition that is supported by the United States to drug cartels and narco gangs. That was quite amusing. People have seen the picture of Erdogan holding up the map of Israeli expansionism. It was quite an interesting UN General Assembly debate when we heard the different heads of state. 90 heads of state were in town. Not as many heads of state as some previous years, I will say. And it's worth noting that, the first day of the week on Monday, we heard from Greta Thunberg, and it was all about climate change. And you can almost speculate that maybe the reason some of these heads of state were not there was not as much enthusiasm for the climate summit as some would expect.
Which is interesting, Caleb, only because there were big protests, not only in Washington, D.C., where they were shutting down traffic and stuff like that, but in New York as well. Isn't that right?
Oh, of course, and all over Europe. I mean, it was quite a big moment. But some people are interpreting this climate thing as almost a response to the yellow vest, right? I mean, 46 weeks we've had the yellow vests out in the streets protesting in France, demanding the ouster of Macron, kind of a mainstream centrist European politician. And the spark of the protest was an environmental regulation, an environmental law that was, targeting, people that drive cars and have to get to work. And this yellow vest is something that every French person who drives a car is required to have as a safety thing. In case their car breaks down, they have to have a yellow vest they can put on if they want to get off on the side of the road and fix their car for safety. A lot of the yellow vesters, they think climate change is a problem. They believe in global warming. They're not deniers, but they say, why should working people have to pay for a crisis, created by rich, big corporations? But some people are interpreting what Greta Thunberg is doing and the big push from centrist European politicians like Macron for this big, explosion of climate activism is almost a pushback against the yellow vest. There's almost an attempt to say, no. Climate change is a big problem. We all got to accept austerity. We all got to be more frugal. We all ought to accept cuts. People see this as kind of a pushback against the rising populism.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And also, I'll mention one other thing about the yellow vest. I was thinking about this. Now, Caleb, we're also on the anniversary of China, so like 70 years. And there were more violent clashes in Hong Kong. I want to say that I've noticed that the Hong Kong protests have gotten the coverage, as you say, 46 weeks. It's going on a year of these yellow vest protests. And I don't see nearly as much coverage of the yellow vest protest as I do of Hong Kong. Have you noticed the same thing?
Oh, I certainly have. And I trust me, if people in the United States or people in France were doing the kind of things that these Hong Kong protesters are doing in the airport, for goodness sakes, and elsewhere, if that was happening, you can bet these folks would be portrayed as terrorists and criminals and violent thugs. But because they're going up against the Chinese government, they're portrayed as heroes. I mean, the level of bias in the media is quite extreme. I mean, we can't forget that the reason that Hong Kong was seized from China, let's not forget this, is because China would not accept the importation of narcotics, the Opium Wars, right? That was, the emperor in China tried to say no more drugs, British Empire, you can't send any more opium and drugs into the country. And because of that, the British waged not one but two wars to demand that China accept the importation of narcotics. And as a result of those wars, they seized Hong Kong. So Hong Kong itself, came about as a pretty dishonorable method of and justification. But on top of that, what is the issue of the Hong Kong protests? People want to make this about everything under the sun. They want to make it about human rights in China. They want to make it about this. They want to make it about that. But the issue, the spark of the Hong Kong protests is the extradition law. If I were to be, breaking the law, facing criminal charges as a citizen of the United States, and I fled to Hong Kong, Hong Kong would extradite me back to the United States. If I were a British citizen facing criminal charges and I went to Hong Kong, they would extradite me back to Britain. However, even though Hong Kong is part of China, if you are a person in the mainland of China, if you are facing criminal charges on the Chinese mainland, Hong Kong will not extradite you back to the Chinese mainland, even though Hong Kong, one country, two systems, is part of China. That doesn't make any sense. That does not make any sense. And for China, a 5,000-year-old civilization, a country that has really struggled to, fight for its independence and pull itself up by its bootstraps, to basically have one city, that basically has erected kind of a wall and said people here are shielded from facing any penalty for breaking laws in the rest of China. That's a national humiliation. And if you read the articles that these Hong Kong protesters have put out, what's the issue? It's the business community. It's the rich corporations. They want to be able to go into the Chinese mainland, break the law, bribe people, practice corruption, and then be able to not face any accountability for it. It's pretty obvious here. There are legitimate grievances, I'm sure, that these folks have around, the gap between the rich and poor rising in Hong Kong, around human rights concerns. But the initial cause for the protest is shielding rich and powerful, people from being extradited to the Chinese mainland and having to be accountable under Chinese law in China. Hong Kong is part of China.
Well, Caleb, we got a few more minutes left, but I think we should touch base with some of the things that Sergei Lavrov said. One of the things I thought that was very interesting and I thought appropriate, and basically he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that the U.S. can't is unable to accept that there are other countries such as Russia and China and Iran, that some of the regional powers are growing, that they're not the only hyperpower anymore. And what he's saying is the West subverts international law to suit its needs. And as far as I'm concerned, that's extremely accurate. If you look at what's going on, around, whether it's Iran or Syria, et cetera. What are your thoughts on Sergei Lavrov's speech to the UN?
Well, I must say, I heard his speech to the UN, very powerful, hit on many points. And I was in the press briefing room when he spoke to the press, and I will say that the moment that stuck with me more than anything was when he talked about the visas for 10 members of the Russian diplomatic delegation being denied, and how he had met with Mike Pompeo, and he was confident that neither Trump nor Mike Pompeo were responsible for that decision to deny visas to the Russian diplomatic delegation. And he said that raises the question, who is making these decisions? And you have to ask yourself, if the President of the United States or the Secretary of State have no idea and don't have the power to stop visas being blocked, who is making these decisions?
And that's State Department. Visas are State Department.
And or as I call it, the deep State Department.
Right.
No, because that's what it is. I love it when people try to act like the deep state isn't a real. If you would define it as like some nefarious, vague thing, then I guess it doesn't make sense. The deep state is the persistent state. It's these employees who are in the State Department. It's this guy like Volker, who was at the McCain Institute, the Ukraine envoy who just stepped down. I don't know why that guy was in there in the first place. That he should not have been there. He's an enemy of the president's policies and a obstruction to getting the truth out about what actually happened in Ukraine. Hey, Caleb, do you have any other thoughts, by the way, I just want to make sure, because I know you follow stuff in China. Do you have any other thoughts on the 70th anniversary that we're experiencing in China right now?
Well, I guess I should just say, look at what China was like 70 years ago, and look at what China is like today. I can't see any more great example of success. Their development of socialism with Chinese characteristics, where they maintain a state-run economy with 5-year plans, but at this point, they allow all kinds of free market stuff. People open their own businesses. Tech startups are starting up. They have a frugal entrepreneurial culture, but centered around a state central plan. They have raised hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. They have brought infrastructure to the whole country. I mean, the Chinese miracle is something that can't be overlooked. And I've noticed that in Trump's previous UN General Assembly speeches, both of the two previous ones, he said that, communism and socialism have failed everywhere they've ever been tried. They destroy every nation. He didn't say that this time. Instead, what he said was that China's 5-year economic plans give it an unfair advantage. And it sounds like when you look at China's history there's a pretty strong argument for a communist party based on Marxism, Leninism, and Mao Zedong thought, as well as Deng Xiaoping theory and the 3 representations of Jiang Zemin. And now President Xi's thoughts for a moderately prosperous socialist society. It seems like you can see there, a real strong success economically coming from Marxist leadership and socialist central planning.
It seems something that we talk about, Caleb, now, and that is when we use the terms, communism, socialism, capitalism, in the global neoliberal world, a lot of those words, and like you were just talking about, that this kind of hybrid thing that China has become, those words aren't as applicable in a strict sense as they used to be, are they?
No, I mean, when I was in school, I learned that communism means that everyone gets paid the exact same wage, no matter how hard they work. And of course, no one then has any incentive to work. And so it just doesn't work. And this is not an accurate assessment. And, to understand why China is not a capitalist country, despite having a big market, to understand that in China their system is a socialist system, despite the fact that there's billionaires and people do business and all of that. It requires a real deep understanding of Karl Marx and his teachings, and the understanding of the concept of preliminary transformation, and that a capitalist economy is an economy in where everything is carried out according to what is profitable for those who own the means of production. But when the state controls the means of production, whether they be privately owned or publicly owned, but when there is a state
Well, unfortunately, sorry about this, but we're just about out of time. We just got the notice that we got to wrap up. Where can people go online to find all the things Caleb Maupin?
It's CalebMaupin.com, CalebMaupin.com.
All right, thanks a lot, Caleb Maupin. He is a journalist and political analyst, and he's very familiar with China and was able to help us out with some real good info on that. Coming up next, debunked. ABC didn't tell who denied Ukraine. 202-521-1320. You're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Tune in Tuesdays to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for Women in Society with Professor Hannah Dickinson, where we talk about the major issues, challenges, and struggles facing women in all aspects of society. Hannah Dickinson, professor and organizer with the Geneva Women's Assembly, joins the show this Tuesday and every Tuesday on Loud and Clear. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Line with Nixon and Stranahan on 105.5 FM and 1390 AM in Washington, D.C. Your morning drive time talk show for news and entertainment.
And you can call us 202-521-1320. So, Garland, I noticed there's this guy, Tom Bossert. He's a former Homeland Security advisor under President Trump. He came in under President Trump, and I'm going to note that he resigned basically right after John Bolton came in. But that's not as significant as who John Bolton replaced. This was a guy who was in place when H.R. McMaster was there. Does that make sense?
He was a fellow at the Atlantic Council.
Well, hang on.
Okay, go ahead.
We'll get to that.
All right, go ahead.
He was on ABC News, but I'm going to point out that he was there and he left when McMaster left. That's
Okay.
what I'm going to point out.
Gotcha,
He left when McMaster left. I'm going to point out that's significant for a reason I will point out in a second. So he was on ABC News this week with George Stephanopoulos, and he talked about this debunked Ukraine theory. Now, do we have that? We got one clip, I think, right? Let's play that clip. This is this guy, Tom Bossert, former Department of Homeland Security advisor. Let's listen to him. We have the Tom Bossert clip, correct? Okay, there we go. Let's hear that. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Let's play the first one.
For clarity here, George, let me just again repeat that it has no validity. The United States government reached its conclusion on attributing to Russia the DNC hack in 2016 before it even communicated it to the FBI and long before the FBI ever knocked on the door at the DNC. So a server inside the DNC was not relevant to our determination to the attribution. It was made up front and beforehand. And so while servers can be important in some of the investigations that followed, it has nothing to do with the U.S. government's attribution of Russia for the DNC hack.
Okay, now what he's talking about there is the fact that Trump was saying that CrowdStrike, who's the only people to examine the server, and that's it, they're the only people to examine the server, was mentioned in this call with Zelensky. Now, I've been talking about CrowdStrike for going on 3 years now, about 3 years. And I've been pointing out that, CrowdStrike worked for the DNC. So they were a private company who was working for the DNC. Now, what this guy Tom Bossert is saying is that CrowdStrike looking at the server had nothing to do with attributing it to Russia, that the IC, the intelligence community, Tom Bossert is a frickin' liar. First off, the IC cites CrowdStrike.
Yes.
I'm going to say this again. You're a liar, Tom. You're a liar. Now, why is Tom a liar? Why is that? Why is Tom Bossert a liar? And the answer is that the day Tom Bossert was hired, guess who tweeted out a congratulations?
I'm guessing. Oh, please don't tell me it's Hillary Clinton.
No.
Who?
No. Dmitry Alperovich.
The
head of CrowdStrike.
And also a fellow at Atlantic Council.
Right. So Tom Bossert is a fellow at the Atlantic Council. And in his tweet, which hang on one second, let me find it here. I want to read the exact tweet to you. And because I have it here. Whoops. Where is it? I have it somewhere, Carly. But I want to read to you because it's very interesting to me. But he says, I want to thank my fellow Atlantic Council. That he just comes out and says it.
Oh, geez.
I want to thank my fellow Atlantic Council. Well, here's how you can find it. It's not actually hard. I looked up his name, Tom Bossert Alperovich, and the tweet showed up right away. So immediately. Now, why is the McMaster thing that I mentioned important? And the reason is McMaster's the guy who, when Trump, this is reported by Bob Woodward, I mentioned it a number of times. When Trump said, hey, Ukraine was colluding with the DNC, McMaster said, no, that's a conspiracy theory. That's the Russians making that up.
Right.
No, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's an absolute fact. Alexandra Chalupa, a Clinton aide who was in the Bill Clinton White House, who's a DNC operative, who's a Ukrainian American, went to the Ukrainian embassy, and she was doing a lot of work in 2014 and 2015 to take out Manafort. She started this. Not only that, she started the whole Russians hack thing.
Yep.
So, no, when this guy, Tom Bossert, goes on ABC and lies And by the way, they never mention that he was congratulated by the guy that Trump is criticizing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Stephanopoulos doesn't go, well, hey, you're defending CrowdStrike. But the guy from CrowdStrike's a big fan of yours. Dimitri, you know him, right? You're friends with him. Are you friendly with him? You're both fellows at the Atlantic Council, and he said you were a great choice. This is why he's not a great choice. And let me point out something else. He's a Department of Homeland Security advisor, right? Well, let me play the other clip. Then I'll come back to the significant thing. He's at DHS. Remember, I mentioned Alexandra Chalupa. We'll come back to her in just a second. Let's hear that second clip from Tom Bossert.
Well, I didn't see, like others have seen, pressure in this call. I understand why people are interpreting it that way, but I've spent a lot of time with this president, and I can easily see other reasons for why this president might have delayed the aid to Ukraine and those Javelin missiles. In fact, as you know, President Obama considered this deeply and decided not to provide lethal military support. President Trump and I and others spent quite a bit of time talking about this. In fact, in the call itself, although there are a lot of other reasons, he alludes to one that's kind of quintessentially Donald Trump, and that is his frustration that Angela Merkel and the German nation member of NATO is doing nothing to help Ukraine, and he expressed some lamentation over that fact. So why he delayed is the key question, and you know, important, George, to remind everyone that he did ultimately provide the money and the Javelin missiles, but this was the second time that he considered doing it.
Now there you see he's kind of, he's being moderate right there because he doesn't want to piss off Trump, I think. And he is pointing out something that's valid and useful. But earlier in the interview, he talks about this is a conspiracy theory. He openly talks about it. Now, he's saying, now, if you look at what he's saying there, by the way, that's significant because it points out that the Democrats' whole case for impeachment, which is that there's a quid pro quo, is not true.
Right.
Does that make sense? So at least he's being that honest. But he called this a conspiracy theory. It is not a conspiracy theory. Now, the reason it's significant...
No, it's a conspiracy.
Right. It was a conspiracy. Alexandra Chalupa admittedly... Do you know who admitted that Alexandra Chalupa was there?
Who?
Ambassador Chali. Remember? He came out a few months ago, and he said, yes, she did come here, and yes, she was looking for dirt on Trump. Yes, yes, yes. We did assist her. He admitted that. So she's admitted it. There's not a question in the world about it. But the reason they want to call this a conspiracy theory over and over and over again, the reason they're doing this is because they don't want you to know the truth. Now, here's the other part of the truth that they don't want you to know about. Alexandra Chalupa, on her Facebook page, the day after the election, went up and said she was working with the DOJ and DHS as they were scanning states' voting systems, which, by the way, they were doing against the will of the states. In other words, the DHS was hacking voting systems. She said she was working with a group called the Protectors, who were associated with this convicted felon serial bomber, Brett Kimberlin, we talk about. But what I want to point out is that should have been investigated, and it still needs to be. The fact that the DHS was scanning states' voting systems against their will. And how do we know that? Because the IP addresses came from within the DHS. And the fact that this Democratic operative, she's not a Department of Homeland Security official.
Nope.
Why was she doing a ride-along? You see what I'm saying? Yep. This shows the problem with the Department of Homeland Security. So once again, the fact that this guy Bossert was there shows completely that the fox was guarding the hen house when it comes to this.
Well, you know, interestingly enough, Alexandra Chalupa is tweeting right now, and I find that interesting because you know the Chalupa sisters and their, you know, how connected they are with the Atlantic Council. But what we're looking at here is an instance where, in my opinion, and I've been getting a lot of heat for it, where if you are an independent thinker, if you are not tied by bias, that you've got to hate Trump or love this person, if you get away from all of that, and that's what I get away from, and you look at this and you read what happened, and you look at this so-called whistleblower complaint, it becomes obvious what's going on here. And that is, A, it's not a whistleblower complaint. It's an investigation, an investigative report. But B, and this is what the thing I find interesting, as I look at what the Democratic Party is doing, it's not in their best interest to do this. It's obvious to me that long term this is going to be extremely damaging to the Democratic Party, because any way you look at it, I don't see how they win. And not only that, I don't know what even a win would be for them, because even if it goes to the, remember, this is an inquiry. They have to vote to decide whether they're going to even move forward with articles of impeachment. But anyway you look at it, it goes to the Senate and it dies. And there's no real meat here. It is abstract. What's interesting about this whole the entire Russiagate, now Ukraine Gate, which is Russiagate 1.1, is that these things are so abstract that what you've got to believe now is that the Russians or whoever, the Iranians, whoever, that these are abstract thinkers, that they're almost like artists. Right? That they don't be like, okay, well, we want to get that guy, we'll go hit him in the head with a brick. No, abstract. Well, we're going to do something. We're going to put out these kind of coded messages on Facebook, pictures of puppies, and then people interpret them in a way that's going to be detrimental to the United States. Think about that for a second. Think about this whole Russiagate thing and the concept of abstract attacks on a country. We're supposed to believe that one country's looking at another country, going to do almost like abstract art, almost like a painting where you look at it and there's just like swipes all over the canvas, and you got to figure out what it is. And people stand around and one person says, well, I think it's a plant. And the other person says, no, I think it's a picture of JFK. No, it's the moon. No, it's all eternity, whatever, right? There's some abstract art. That's apparently, according to Russiagate, what the Russians and what all of the Chinese do. They're abstract artists, and they do things like, we want to have people look at our tweets or look at our Facebook pages and have things that if you look at them on their surface, there's nothing directly, there's no direct malice. There's nothing you can look at when you look at a Facebook page full of pictures of puppies and say, well, there you go. The Russians are trying to take us out. In fact, one Clint Watts actually went in front of Congress and argued that a Facebook page with a picture of puppies was in fact an attack. And he had to go so far as to say, but sure, yeah, and I'm paraphrasing here, yeah, it's a picture of a Facebook page with a picture of puppies, but what we really believe is they're going to start with that. And then eventually, when they suck all the puppy lovers in, see, all the people are going to look at that and go, wow, a Facebook page with pictures of puppies. I got to follow that. Why? I don't know, but that's irrelevant. What's really good, what happens next is that they're all going to, I don't know, write in Putin, whatever. They're all going, but the bottom line was, he was like, yeah. And then eventually the Russians are going to change that. And they're going to start moving into political things. Again, it's abstract. You got to want to believe this. You really have to want to believe these things. But there's a couple of things going on under the scenes, not the least of which being that that there are a lot of people in Washington that are motivated to believe these things, and it's not even because they want to believe them. They're motivated. Why? I was only getting off the metro the other day, and I saw this advertisement where Raytheon is putting on this cybersecurity conference. I think it's already happened. Bottom line, there's a whole lot of money now in cybersecurity. And a big part of that, not that there shouldn't be a lot of cybersecurity, but Raytheon makes missiles and Tomahawk missiles and things that blow people up and kill people. Well, gee, what do you know? So now they're into cybersecurity for the same reason. Real quick story. A while back, I found out that there was these things called Medicare Advantage plans, and that Goldman Sachs had bought a company that was selling Medicare Advantage plans. Why? Because it's another way to get government money. They looked at it and they're like, oh, we're a bank, but hey, wait a minute, Medicare Advantage plans, that's money coming to government. Let's buy the company that has the contracts and we'll make the money. There are a lot of people sitting around just waiting to get their hands on another government dollar. And that's what a lot of these people are doing now. So they've got to blow up the idea of cybersecurity, not that it's not valid, but they got to blow it up so they can make money and get paid. And General Jack Keane and Iron Net and on and on and on. You'll find all these names connected to money coming in, your money, but we're going to fill you in, and we're always going to be on top of this subject. You're listening to Fault Lines. One more hour of Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.